In this video, I want to talk a little bit about the four traditional types of homicide in New York State so that we can apply them to a case that I posted for you, People versus Strong. So first, the four traditional types of homicide. And as I've noted, there are other types of homicide in New York, but these are the four types that give us a glimpse into the People versus Strong case. So, going from the most to the least serious, we begin with murder in the second degree. And here, the defendant has acted with the intent, or if you remember, the conscious objective to cause the death of another person or a third person. Moving down the list, manslaughter in the first degree, here the intent isn't to kill someone, but to cause serious physical injury, but nevertheless causing the death of such person. And an example I use is assume A wishes to administer a severe beating to B, but not to kill B. Nevertheless, the severe beating results in B's death. In that case, A would be liable for manslaughter in the first degree. The last two forms, manslaughter in the second degree and criminally negligent homicide, bring into play the elements of mental culpability of recklessness and criminal negligence. And if you recall, both reckless and criminal negligence require that the defendant act with gross negligence, and their difference lies in the area of risk perception. The reckless defendant is aware of the risk caused by the gross negligence, but disregards it. Whereas the criminally negligent defendant who has acted with extreme or gross negligence is not aware of the risk. And so recklessness finds its way into manslaughter in the second degree. The defendant recklessly causes the death of another person, and criminally negligent homicide, as obviously the name states, the defendant acting with criminal negligence causes the death of another person. Now, let's talk a little bit about People versus Strong. And if you haven't read the case, really do yourself a favor and go back and read the case. And this will be a more meaningful experience, this explanation of the case. But we've got the defendant, who's the leader of a religious group. It had various beliefs, including the belief that mind could control matter. And the defendant believed himself to be particularly powerful regarding this idea that mind could control matter, to the point where he could lie on a bed of nails without bleeding. He could raise people up off the ground, could suspend a person's heartbeat, pulse, and breathing while that person remained conscious. And at a particular ceremony of this religious group, the defendant called forth a follower, allegedly placed him in a trance to cause his heart to stop beating, and then with a knife stabbed the follower a number of times in the heart and chest, and with a hatchet, and I believe with a hatchet, he placed the hatchet into the follower's hip. And of course, to place a hatchet into the hip, you've got to swing with some degree of force. So, though the jury didn't have to believe it, the defendant at his trial introduced evidence from one of his followers that the defendant had successfully performed the ceremony on previous occasions, and the defendant himself claimed to have performed the ceremony countless times over the past 40 years without once causing injury. There was also evidence that before the defendant used the knives and hatchets on the follower, who had voluntarily participated up to that point, objected, stating, "No, Father," and the defendant answered, "It will be all right, son." So, what I'm asking us to consider is which of those four traditional types of homicide set forth above would we believe to be the most appropriate form of homicide to charge the defendant with? And when we get to these kinds of exercises, there really isn't so much a right or wrong answer, it's the quality of our reasoning in support of the answer. So I thought it would be useful if I would simply set forth, as I have, an argument in support of each of the four basic types. And I think this kind of illustrates that we're not necessarily locked into a right or a wrong answer. So if we looked at let me move down here just a bit. Murder, an argument I would be making in support of murder is simply if you see someone walk up to someone and stab them with three knives and a hatchet, it's not unreasonable to conclude that the person acted with the intent to kill. So I think that that's a logical argument to support a claim of murder. Moving on, I think you could also make an argument, if you didn't choose murder, that manslaughter in the first degree would be an appropriate choice. Manslaughter in the first degree, again, is acting with the intent to cause serious physical injury. Death has resulted. And one could argue that the defendant wanted to cause a serious physical injury in the short run, though no lasting harm, to show his great powers, and nevertheless, acting with that intent, he killed the person. I think the stronger choices are the last two, either reckless homicide or criminally negligent homicide. And in both instances, we have to find that the defendant acted with gross negligence, and I think that's a pretty easy conclusion to reach if you disregarded the crimes of intent. Uh, I think it's almost self-evident to say that stabbing someone with a knife or with three knives and with a hatchet is way beyond the standard of care a reasonable person would have ever followed, and it's extreme negligence. The harder, I think, task is to distinguish between the two. Uh, in other words, is it reckless or criminal negligence? And the distinction turns on the area or turns in the area of risk perception. And I think if we looked at reckless homicide, so here we'd have to show that the defendant was aware of the risk. And it seems to me that one argument would be that the defendant was aware of the risk just by a sheer fact of the follower asking him not to do it, which would have put him on notice that the follower wasn't in the right uh, physical trance. Uh, we could also say that the defendant was aware of the risk simply in his arrogance, believed he could, if you will, overcome it. And he wanted to, again, illustrate his great powers. If you turn to criminally negligent homicide, I think one could make an argument that, again, we have gross negligence. We always have to have that, but that the defendant's belief in his powers was so great that he didn't believe that there was any risk attendant, uh, that he simply didn't perceive it. So those are the four choices. And what happens in the case itself is the district attorney in Monroe County, which is where this happened down the road in Rochester, reached the conclusion that, as I put it, the facts were so weird that he or she couldn't feel confident that murder or manslaughter in the first degree, both requiring intent, could necessarily be established. So the defendant was charged with reckless homicide. Now, there's a point of procedure we have to take into account at this point. And what it is at the end of a criminal trial, before the case goes to the jury, the prosecutor, or will likely be the case, the defense attorney can ask for what we call a charge down. And that is, your argument is that, Judge, there's a reasonable view of the evidence that a jury could find the defendant not guilty of reckless homicide, but only guilty of criminally negligent homicide. In this case, if you put yourself in the shoes of the defense attorney's got to believe that there's no jury that's going to simply conclude that this guy isn't guilty of anything. So in an effort to cut losses, you would ask the judge to give the jury the choice of finding the defendant guilty of reckless homicide. And of course, in your summation, you would argue against that. And if the jury concludes that that has not been established, then to conclude he's guilty only of criminally negligent homicide. The judge, however, found that there was no reasonable view of the evidence that would have permitted a jury to ever conclude that the defendant was unaware of the risk. The case went to the jury with only one choice, criminally negligent homicide. Went to the jury with only one choice, reckless homicide, manslaughter in the second degree, and the defendant was found guilty of that. On appeal, the defendant's case reached the highest court, and the highest court, if you've read the case, reverses the conviction. It doesn't set the defendant free, but it would remand the case or send the case back for a new trial. And the Court of Appeals concluded that the jury could have found the defendant not guilty of reckless homicide if they believed, I don't know if you and I would, but if they believed the defendant that he had pulled this stunt off in the past on many occasions without any difficulties to the person who was the subject of the ceremony. And as the Court of Appeals says, if you read the case, if the jury believed that, they could find that the defendant was unaware of the risk and thus guilty only of criminally negligent homicide. So that sums up what the Court of Appeals did. What a question that you might have is, well, what happened when the case went back to the trial court? And the answer is, I don't know, because it went off the screen. My best guess is that what did happen is that when the case went back, the defendant entered a plea of guilty, probably, and I don't know to what, it could have even been to reckless homicide, but a plea of guilty predicated on some kind of a sentencing commitment from the judge. In any event, we've had a chance to look at the four traditional forms of homicide, and we've had a chance to look at three of the four elements of mental culpability: intent, recklessness, and criminal negligence, and how they would be applied analytically to a particular fact pattern, and then what actually happened in the case. And we snuck in a little bit about criminal procedure with the charge down in the standard for that. So that'll conclude this video.